Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians and guests. There is some energy in the room today. So today is the long-awaited Lonnie and Clyde show, with one of the best-kept secrets in Atlanta and one of the worst-kept secrets in Atlanta. Let's start with the latter, one of the worst-kept secrets. Our old friend and past President Clyde Tuggle needs no introduction to you all, given what he has contributed to our community. Welcome back. Since retiring from a storied career at the Coca-Cola Company, Clyde has got up to all sorts of things, including being named chairman of the board of advisors for the Center for Global Leadership at the American Councils on International Education, the longest title in the history of the world, which he co-founded, no less. He became co-founder and partner of Pine Island Capital Partners, an innovative private equity investment firm which focuses on U.S. middle-market aerospace and defense investment opportunities. He also now serves on the board of directors of the Georgia Power Company, where he is chairman of the Compensation Committee, and on the boards of Oxford Industries and Triform. Despite now spending most of his time between Florida and D.C., he remains a committed member of our club, which we are grateful for, and it's great to see you again in person. So during the summer months, Clyde and I caught up, and the conversation turned to the state of the entrepreneurial ecosystem in our city. Clyde then first told me about one of the best-kept secrets in our city. Lonnie Johnson, doing incredible, potentially game-changing work in his unassuming laboratory on the doorstep of Grady Memorial Hospital, literally a stone's throw away from here. Clyde encouraged me to visit, and I left certain that our club needed to know more about this humble and inspirational inventor and entrepreneur. I mean, I knew the name, but I just had no idea. Lonnie Johnson is a 2022 inductee of the National Inventors Hall of Fame, perhaps best known as the inventor of the Super Soaker water gun. And by the way, Lonnie said he'll autograph your Nerf gun if you brought it along today. That generated several $1 billion in retail sales and remains a top-selling toy worldwide. Incredibly, Lonnie has over 140 patents, with over 20 more pending, and he has authored several publications on spacecraft power systems. He holds a BS degree in mechanical engineering, an MS degree in nuclear engineering, and an honorary PhD in science from Tuskegee University. He also has an honorary PhD from the University of Indiana. He is a former U.S. Air Force officer and NASA engineer. So I'll leave it to you to infer who is smarter, Lonnie or Clyde. Lonnie's professional service includes leadership roles on some of our nation's most advanced technology systems, including the Stealth B-2 bomber, NASA's Voyager mission, the Galileo mission to Jupiter, the Cassini mission to Saturn, and the Mars Observer Project, for which he received a number of awards, including Air Force Commendation and Achievement Medals. Thank you for your service, Lonnie. Presently, he is the president and founder of Johnson Research and Development, a technology incubator. His current mission is to invent paradigm shift solutions to the world's sustainable energy and environmental challenges. He recently spun off 2 independent green energy companies, the first being JTech Energy, which is commercializing a heat engine that has no moving mechanical parts. It converts heat directly into electricity more efficiently than any existing engine known to man. And Johnson Energy Storage, which is introducing the next generation of rechargeable batteries using revolutionary breakthroughs in solid-state battery technology. I wonder if Elon Musk knows about that. For me, perhaps most impressively, Lonnie also runs a STEM activity center that mentors grade school students. Its activities include a partnership with Georgia's First Robotics. He has impacted so many young lives for the better. So we know Stephanie's theme for this year is finding common ground for the common good. Lonnie's inspirational story of perseverance, culminating in the potentially game-changing research that is on the cusp of being industrialized right here in Atlanta, is something our club needs to know more about, and is surely common ground for the common good. So let's welcome this national treasure, Lonnie Johnson, to the stage, along with Clyde, to learn a little bit more. And Clyde, perhaps you can answer the first question. Did you get hurt in a Nerf gun fight?
I met, and it's just by way of sort of, again, of adding on to the introduction. 3 years ago, David Radcliffe called me, and he said, I'm involved with an interesting company, but more importantly, I'm involved with an interesting man. And I think you should meet him because I think there's some aspects of what you've done in your career, especially as it relates to government relations and interacting with the government, that could be of value. And so I said, that's fine. And I had heard about Lonnie, but had never met him and had never seen his shop. And so we set up a meeting. I thought you and I would spend an hour together, and I thought this will be very nice. And I went over to his laboratory, ostensibly for a 1-hour meeting. Well, 5 hours later, I left. And what I discovered, to your point, Adrian, was the best kept secret in this city. And I thought, how is it that I spent my whole life in this city and my life connected to business in this city and really didn't know anything about what was going on over there in the shadow of Grady Hospital in the Sweet Auburn neighborhood? And what I discovered, and interestingly, I had just finished the biography of Thomas Edison. And what I discovered over there is nothing short of Edison in the 21st century. And in our own backyard, we have Thomas Edison, and we have a laboratory that is not unlike what you would have seen in Menlo Park at the turn of the last century. So this is really exciting, and David did say to me that by full disclosure, I must tell you that I am an investor in his company and an advisor to the company, and we welcome your checks. So let's, Lonnie, let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. Your dad, and I want to start really with your childhood, and it's so interesting. Your father was really the one who I think you've said explained some of the basic principles of electricity to you at an early age. You once tore up your sister's doll because you wanted to understand how the eyes rolled back and forth. And I heard that you almost burned down your house in Mobile, Alabama as a kid. So, Lonnie, what happened there? Could you explain that to us?
Yeah. Well, when I was, in the 6th grade, when President Kennedy made his speech about putting a man on the moon before the decade was out, and of course I was, as a small kid, always interested in how things worked, and used to take my toys apart and put them back together. Usually I could get them back together, but sometimes I didn't. But was always curious about how things worked. And when President Kennedy made his moon speech saying we're going to put a man on the moon before the decade was out, I thought, geez, that's very exciting, and I thought, geez, by the time the decade was out, I was going to be really, really old. Well, little did I know. But in any case, I got interested in rockets, and I went to the library and I started, reading up on rockets, and I learned to make my own rocket fuel. And first off, in fact, the first experiment I did, some of you may remember the old-time TVs that had the antennas, those small aluminum tubes. Well, the first rocket I made was with that. I shaved the heads off of matches and stuffed them down the tube, with the idea of lighting it and get the match heads burning and shooting exhaust out the back. That was going to be my rocket. Well, instead of burning, the whole thing exploded, and I was right there in front of it. It literally exploded in my face, and so I couldn't see for a while. My ears were ringing, and I thought, geez, I need to do a little bit better job. So I went to the library, and I started looking up rockets, and I found a formula for rocket fuel, and I started mixing my own rocket fuel. And it was pretty straightforward.
Do not do this at home.
And it was really neat because it was a simple ingredient, except when I first read up the formula, I didn't know what it was. So it said, it was just simple. I'll tell you, when I'm talking to kids, I don't tell them what the formula is. But I'll tell you. I assume that you can handle that, okay? Saltpeter and sugar, potassium nitrate and sugar. So when the formula said potassium nitrate and sugar, I said, well, what is potassium nitrate? I had no idea. And so one day my mother, this must have been months later, sent me to the pharmacist to pick up a prescription. And while I was waiting on the pharmacist, I was walking down the aisle just randomly reading out of curiosity, and I saw this bottle of potassium nitrate. Oh, that's it. So I got some, took it home, mixed it with the sugar. First I was just mixing the powders, right? And it would burn. It was really great rocket fuel, but the real formula required melting the sugar down to form this syrup-like material, and then you pour that into the body of the rocket, and then it hardens into a really solid fuel. So I'm gonna do the real deal. And so I was in the kitchen on the stove, mixing rocket fuel. I had the saltpeter and sugar in the pot. It was all, and I was stirring it, making sure everything got heated evenly, but then part of it overheated. I saw a little spark right at the side of the pot, and I knew there was no way to stop it. And so the only thing I could do was back up, and the flames shooting up out of the pot, and the smoke was so thick I couldn't see my hands literally in front of my face. And burned a few holes in the chair, those small holes, so it didn't set the house on fire, but it was a very scary situation. So at that point, I was waiting on my dad to come home, so I put on 2 pair of pants. And he got home, he looked around, he looked at that, and he looked at the pot and the holes in the chair, and he looked at me and says, you're gonna have to do that outside from now on, and he bought me a hot plate. So, when I talk to parents about, not stymieing kids' curiosity, it's very important because he didn't shut me down. He didn't criticize me and punish me in a way that would have caused me to be a little less curious. And I'm very fortunate in that regard.
So the other thing I just loved about your story of growing up and this, particularly in high school, this interest in science and technology was this famous science fair that you participated in. I guess that was your senior year?
My senior year in high school,
So
yes.
tell us a little bit about what date did you take to the science fair?
Well, this was in 1968. Now, I grew up in Mobile, Alabama. This is during the Civil Rights Movement, and things were going full bore. My high school was still segregated, and people were literally coming on TV during that time and talking about how they didn't want their kids going to school with those heathens, and they should put us all in Sykes and ship us back to Africa and blah, blah, blah. And so all of this was the environment. And I had been working on a lot of short-term projects. It didn't take hardly any time to build a rocket and put the fuel in them or whatever, and some of the other things that I was working on. But I wanted a big project, something that I could really get into. So I've been watching these robots on TV, Lost in Space Robot and Robbie the Robot from Monsters from the Id. Some of you might remember that movie. And nobody told me that they had people inside, so I figured that robots were a real thing, right? So I started working on this robot, and it took me about a year, so it was a major project. And by the time I wanted to, of course, put him in a science fair, and all of the science fairs would pass before he was finished. And the last one was a Junior Engineering Technical Society exposition and conference. So it was a big deal. It was held at the University of Alabama, Southeast Region, U.S., kind of deal. So it was a real big competition, and Lonnie was ready. We went and participated. Lonnie was about this tall. He was really a full-size robot. He had arms. He could move. I wanted to design him so that he could move his arms anywhere a human could. So I had ball joints at the shoulders and grabbers to pick up things. And he was on wheels so he could roll around and swivel on his base and so forth. So a full design effort, long term. I had a kid walk up to me here recently in a robotics competition and said, Dr. Johnson, what software did you use in your robot? Of course, there was no software. It was all relays and switches and, so anyway, at the University of Alabama, this was, of course, a few years after Governor Wallace had stood in the door saying no black students would ever attend. And Lonnie won first place. We were the only, my high school, there were 3 of us. I was the only one with a project. The other kids were reading papers, publications that they had written. But I was the only black kid there. We were only 3 black kids there, but anyway, my robot was the only one that was in a competition. And Lonnie won first place, which was a major personal moral victory, of course. And that, of course, inspired me and just gave me a lot of more confidence to be even more curious and try even more things that I didn't know any better than to try.
But the robotics piece has been a consistent theme. So I had the privilege of working with Dean Kamen and First and Coca-Cola when I was there had helped to sponsor. And we used to have the World Championships here in Atlanta.
Right.
We don't anymore. And I got some view into that world before I met you. But just take a second. We're going to kind of fast forward to talk a little bit about what you're doing in terms of the promoting STEM education through the robotics program, because you go over to your facility and there's this amazing center that you have built and created for middle and high school and probably elementary school students to engage in robotics as a form of STEM learning. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, you know, when I first learned about FIRST Robotics, someone came to me and actually asked for a meeting, and I said, sure, I'll meet with him. Her name was Patty Cook. In any case, she started telling me about this high school robotics program. I said, hey, I'm in. You know, this is cool. And she started, we really would like, I said, hey, look, I'm in. She didn't realize, because of my own experience with my robot in high school, that, you know, I knew this was something that would have a very, very profound impact on kids' self-confidence. You know, it's one thing to tell a kid that they can do something. It's another thing to have them do it, experience the success, because that's something that they'll always own, and you just can't take that away from them. And that's what I really was inspired to do. And so, you know, right now I'm on the board of Georgia First, so we put on all the robotics competitions across the state. And I'm fortunate in that I have a regulation field at my laboratory for the kids to use. And I host about 8 teams at the high school level, and then each one of those will host teams at the elementary and middle school levels as well. So we have a pretty broad impact. But the other thing that I did was to partner with the 100 Black Men of Atlanta. I see John Grant's in the office here, in the audience here. We actually met first time at Coca-Cola when Dean came in to speak and try to get Coca-Cola's interest in the program, and John was with me at that meeting. And so we set up a program where we partnered, and literally with the idea of going into the inner city and introducing kids to this program, that kids who would otherwise not see it as something that they would want to participate in or even be aware of. And so we literally have gone across the state, and right now we've been very successful because Georgia, across the country in FIRST Robotics, the average participation of minority students, black students in particular, is about 4%. Here in Georgia, it literally is 40%.
Wow. That's it. Wow. And how many young, girls, boys, males, females, since you started the program, would you say have gone through that program?
Well,
at your facility?
I don't personally keep count, but from the sign-in sheets at our sign-in booth here at on my site, we apparently are touching about 10,000 kids a year.
Staggering.
Yeah,
I mean, it is truly. It's something that we as Atlantans should be very proud of and thankful for what you're doing to promote STEM. Among the youth. I want to switch gears for a second. So everybody wants to know about the Super Soaker. Okay, we will have a Super Soaker signing after we're done here. But how on earth does a NASA scientist, and remember, ladies and gentlemen, Lonnie was decorated twice by the United States Air Force for the work he did on the space program. The Galileo project at Jupiter basically utilized technology that he developed. We were referenced to the stealth bomber, et cetera. But how on earth do you get from working at JPL, Jet Propulsion Labs, building rockets, to making a Super Soaker?
Well, basically I've always been a tinkerer. So
a dangerous one, but nonetheless.
So even, so yeah, I worked Air Force, NASA on some of those really advanced programs, but I would go home in the evenings and work on my own ideas, my own projects. And one of the things that, as the expression goes, need is the mother of invention. So the need I was trying to address was the damage that ozone was doing to the environment. If I'm going to work on, I wanted to work on something worthwhile, right? So I was trying to develop a heat pump that would use water instead of instead of freon, because freon was damaging the environment, the ozone layer. So I was experimenting with these nozzles I had made. I was going to use water as a working fluid, and I thought what could be more friendly for the environment than water. And so I machined some nozzles, and I had them hooked up to my bathroom sink. And when the high pressure stream, when I shot the water through the nozzle and had it shooting across the bathroom, I thought to myself, a high powered water gun would really be a lot of fun. So I decided, and I was having trouble getting people to invest in some of the more scientific or technically challenging ideas. And I thought anybody could look at a toy water gun and appreciate it. So I put that project aside and decided to invent a high-performance water gun.
Okay, so you moved from the kitchen to the bathroom, but anyway, keep going.
So, I thought that, I was having trouble getting investors, and so I thought that, I could get this water gun demonstrated, and once that was successful, I thought I could make enough money to really branch out on my own and support my habit. I knew it would do well, because the first time I shot it, I knew it was going to be great. It took about a couple of weeks, I had to make all the components and glue them together, and I put all the engineering knowledge into it for high performance, but you really don't know what it's going to do until you actually fire it for the first time. And when I pulled the trigger the first time, it was really satisfying. I was really glad.
Oh yeah, it was for me too. It was awesome. And it's actually saved my marriage. But anyway, so let me sort of switch gears for a second. So tell us what you're doing now, because in some ways you're sort of back to the future. You've got these two extraordinary businesses, J-Tech, the Johnson Energy storage business. Tell everybody a little bit about what you've been up to the last few years, and why what is happening here in our backyard ostensibly will in fact literally change the world.
Well, Clyde, early on, and I don't know where, but along the way I had realized that I'd been blessed, or felt that I'd been blessed with a gift, and I felt that it would be a sin to squander it, quite honestly, and so I apply myself. We were talking earlier about joining the Rotary Club. I'm excited to do that, but I spend a lot of time in the laboratory because I feel like I should apply myself. I'm obliged to apply myself to try and make a difference and to take on some pretty challenging problems. The environment, of course, is the one that's most pressing at this point in my mind, and so I'm looking for renewable energy sources. So I've invented an engine that converts heat directly to electricity, with the idea of being able to operate on waste heat, low temperature heat, which we have plenty of, as well as primary heat sources such as solar, nuclear, and even geothermal, so that we can eliminate our dependence on fossil fuels. And then I'm also working on advanced battery technology that would give an electric vehicle up to twice the range that we're capable of achieving now with lithium ion. So it's the next generation beyond lithium ion. I started working on batteries, must be over 20 years ago, and at the time, the technology that everybody was excited about was lithium ion batteries, and I knew that, given the large companies that were working on it at the time, that if I got involved, I'd be an also-ran, eaten alive, and probably bring very little to the table. So I looked to see, okay, what's the next thing beyond lithium ion? And I found this solid-state battery at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. I did some analysis and found that at that time it could hold 3 to 4 times the energy of lithium ion. So I said, okay, I'm going to develop this technology and wait on the industry to catch up. Little did I know how difficult that would be. I was going to literally leapfrog the industry. Well, the batteries at Oak Ridge, you could only make micro batteries by sputter deposition, which is what they use to make electronic components. You couldn't make a battery big enough to power a car or even a cell phone. So I literally started a program of making solid-state batteries, all ceramic batteries. Literally, it's a brick, ceramic materials and metal materials. There's no liquid electrolyte involved at all. And you can make the electrolyte, and you can make the cathode material. They're all ceramics. And the problem was when you put them together and you heat them up to fuse them. If you've made pottery, you know what I'm talking about. You do the green casting, and then you put it in the oven, center it, and you get the ceramic piece, right? Well, these materials are active materials, and when you put them in the oven, they react with each other, and you end up with something that's not a battery, just some dumb piece of ceramic. So trying to get them together and bond so that the lithium ions would move between the two turned out to be a really, really tough problem. But we're that close right now. I was talking earlier about it's like looking for the cure for cancer. Well, we're actually making solid-state batteries now using our proprietary materials that we've had to develop in the laboratory that nobody else has. Some of you may know Bert Ellis. I'm sure a lot of you do. Well, he actually came in. He's the CEO of the battery company. McHugh, the heat to electric converter company that I was talking about earlier, Mike came on board as the CEO of that company. And they're going gangbusters. It's like, really, it's like being rescued. So I refer to them as my knights in shining armor who come in and helping me take my research out of the laboratory and turn it into a real business.
You heard that, McHugh. Okay, you have your marching orders. I don't know, President Stephanie, do we have a minute for maybe a Q&A? Okay. I wanted to give everybody here a chance maybe to ask you a question. It better be a smart question. Okay. Oh, this will be a smart question, yes.
It's an easy one. Of that 40% of young black persons doing robotics, etc., what percent of them are women? And the smart thing, I can multiply that from 40%.
We've actually had very good success in that regard. We have an all-girls robotics team at our lab. In fact, one of the students on that team was selected last year, it was a couple of years ago, by Women in Technology as their Girl of the Year because of her accomplishments. We've had very good success in that regard. I don't have an exact number for you. I wish I did. I should measure more since now we've actually turned the program into a nonprofit, and I understand to get outside support you need to have the metrics, and so we'll start doing that. But up until now, it's been just literally a labor of love and being able to see the kids excited coming in and experiencing success.
Maria.
Usually I don't ask a question, but I can't help. How is it you ended up in Atlanta and stayed in Atlanta? If you're from Alabama, and we always hear about how technology companies may start here, but then they end up on the West Coast. So can you tell us?
Well, actually, I moved to Atlanta from the NASA, from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, where I was. And, I grew up in Mobile. At the time, my wife's family was from South Carolina, Florence, and Atlanta was a nice in-between place where our kids and family could hang out with both families. So it was just a central location. So, and also Atlanta, of course, offers a lot. Being in science and technology, I wanted to have access to materials, talent, and all of those things that would enable me as an aspiring inventor to be successful. So Atlanta has it all.
And human talent, because going through your
Yes.
laboratory, you've got a lot of Georgia Tech talent,
Right.
for example. Right. I know you've talked
We
about
have a lot of Georgia Tech talent and a lot of Tuskegee talent.
Yes, of course. Yes, I did that for the benefit of the Georgia Tech graduates in the room. Another, right over here. Thank you.
Dr. Johnson's making this incredible. When kids were here, you're a role model of curiosity. I want them to see it. My question is about the sustainability. I'm just super interested in the ceramic battery. And I know you're not quite to the solution, but you're close. Lithium-ion batteries themselves require mining and materials that aren't necessarily, that have some negative blowback on the environment, right? So you're not getting a total net positive. But what about your ceramics? Is this something that can be manufactured on scale, and to what extent do they have a negative environmental impact as you're making them at scale in
Well,
the future?
the batteries are still lithium batteries. There are a number of advantages over lithium ion. First off, we don't use liquid electrolyte, which is flammable, volatile. So when you see and hear about battery fires, it's generally because the battery overheated, and it's the liquid electrolyte that starts the fire and starts the degradation that can be pretty violent. So we eliminate that problem. But in terms of the battery materials, other than the glass electrolyte, they're the same cathode materials, rare earth metals, and of course the anode is lithium metal. So in that regard, we're not changing the game in terms of going to totally new battery materials. That's the next generation beyond what we're doing. The lithium air battery that we've been doing, in fact, we just finished an Air Force contract looking at that one. Again, a very hard science problem, but this one, think of where you have the lithium, instead of having these minerals, manganese, cobalt, nickel in the cathode, we would use oxygen from the ambient air to react with the lithium so that you don't have all of that extra mass. That'll hold about 10 times the energy of lithium ion, but it's a real hard problem, tough nut to crack. I've been working on that technology for not quite 20 years, almost 20 years, right close. But they're both very worthwhile problems to solve, and so we've maintained a dedicated program to try and crack that nut as well.
Let's start over here, and then you get the last question. How's that?
Dr. Johnson, Lisa Herring, Atlanta Public Schools Superintendent. Thank you, sir, for your brilliance and the impact that it has played on our scholars. I am extraordinarily curious when we talk about STEM and STEAM and we forecast towards the future, just in your own ideation, what careers are kind of top of mind as we're preparing our students to seek positions or opportunities that we can't even name today, particularly those of us for whom this is not our wheelhouse, but we are preparing our scholars to take on those careers down the road. I'd be very curious to hear your reflection on that.
Well, I think the STEM areas in particular, even if you do STEAM, STEM, the adding art to it, I think the foundation in my mind is the technology, the engineering and math skills, and you're an educator, know the importance of science and math in just about everything. I sometimes talk to people about the fact that at one point in the military academies at West Point, the only degree that they would give would be an engineering degree. They changed that, of course, but historically, engineers were the people who were trained to problem solve and think logically, and that was the degree that was preferred. And I actually think it's pretty cool being an engineer. It used to not be cool to be.
Well, you're cool.
It used to not be cool to be a nerd, It's kind of cool now.
Okay,
Billy Levine. Question, real quick. Probably don't need the mic, but that's okay. Thank you. What are your thoughts on our space program today? And if you were the administrator for NASA, what might be your audacious goal that you hope we would achieve at some point in the future?
From every audacious or challenging goal, there's worthwhile results. Whether you achieve what you set out to do or not, you push technology forward. And I think having great aspirations is very important for civilization in general, because it opens the mind and it challenges the imagination, and it allows us to think above petty issues that we can allow ourselves to get consumed with. So I think having that ultimate lofty goal and more challenging, I think it's just inspiring, and I get it as I said earlier, when I heard President Kennedy say that we were going to put a man on the moon before the decade was out, and he said, we're going to do it because it's hard. We don't. And he said, and another thing he said, we don't know how to do this. It's going to require materials that haven't been developed and problems that temperatures that materials going to have to survive that are, we just don't. But we're going to do it anyway because it's hard. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but that's really exciting to set goals. And when I talk to kids, I talk about the power of the human brain turning vision into reality. And I'll even bring a rock, and I'll hold a rock up, and I'll say, this was what was one of man's first tools, was a rock. Use it for military defense, and even capturing food and killing his food, and it's a tool for survival, basically. But then I hold up a cell phone, and I talk about the cell phone being the tool that we hold now. And the cell phone technology was pushed, semiconductor, that was all pushed by NASA in the space program and inspired by that need. But I also talk about and kind of remind them the similarities between the two. The first thing that the two have in common is that they're both minerals from the earth. They're made of the same materials, which is kind of mind-boggling when you think about it that way. But then I tell them the other thing that they have in common is the human brain. It took the human brain to turn raw material, into something as sophisticated as a cell phone. And then I tell them, you all have one. So it's up to you to decide what you're going to do with yours, what information you're going to put into it and what you enable it to do. So, yes, we need goals and sources of inspiration to push us forward.
Lonnie, thank you so much. You've given us much to think about today. We're going to have a quiz on that the formula that you gave us earlier next week. But most importantly, thank you for what you're doing for our city, for the world. Truly, what is happening over in there in your laboratory will change the world. It will, to some extent, save us from ourselves. And ladies and gentlemen, I give you Dr. Lonnie Johnson, the smartest, most interesting man I know.